In the crisp autumn air of October 1942, high above the rugged terrain of Tunisia, a formidable assembly of P-38 Lightnings diligently escorted a squadron of B-17 bombers at an impressive altitude of 25,000 feet. Suddenly, without warning, a menacing formation of German Bf-109gs descended from the blinding glare of the sun, initiating a swift and perilous aerial engagement. The American pilots, reacting with swift determination, advanced their throttles to their maximum extent, attempting to ascend and confront the looming aerial threat. Their powerful twin Allison V-1710 engines roared in a crescendo of mechanical might, yet an unsettling anomaly became immediately apparent. The P-38s struggled to gain altitude, their ascent hampered as if an invisible, immense weight dragged them earthward. In stark contrast, the agile Messerschmitts ascended with remarkable alacrity, exhibiting an almost ethereal grace as they effortlessly positioned themselves for subsequent attack passes. By the time the Lightnings managed to claw their way up a mere 2,000 feet, the German 109s had already achieved an astonishing gain of 4 times that elevation. This encounter was not merely a skirmish, it was a grim prelude, an execution poised to unfold. This disturbing episode, unfortunately, was far from an isolated occurrence. Throughout the pivotal months of late 1942 and early 1943, from the sun-drenched battlefields of North Africa to the frostbitten skies of the European theater, P-38 pilots consistently reported identical operational deficiencies. The Lightning, a marvel of American engineering, was initially conceived as the definitive countermeasure to every aerial challenge the Axis powers could present. Its design boasted twin engines, offering crucial redundancy in combat, coupled with formidable armament and unparalleled speed in level flight. On paper, its capabilities appeared insurmountable, a true aerial leviathan. However, in the harsh crucible of real-world combat, particularly above 20,000 feet, the aircraft performed with an alarming lack of vigor, as if afflicted by a severe respiratory ailment. Pilots frequently recounted experiences of sluggish throttle response, a lamentable rate of climb, and engines that seemed to gasp desperately for oxygen. In the unforgiving domain of a dogfight, where the acquisition of altitude is synonymous with survival, such limitations constituted an unequivocal death sentence. Please stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. The Army Air Force's leadership was acutely aware of the burgeoning problem. Intelligence reports unequivocally confirmed that the latest iterations of German fighter aircraft, specifically the formidable Bf-109G and the agile FW-190A, consistently outclimbed their American counterparts at the critical altitudes where bomber escort missions were necessarily conducted. The P-38, once a symbol of aerial supremacy, was now hemorrhaging skilled pilots and routinely suffering defeats in engagements it should have decisively dominated. Engineers at Lockheed's sprawling Burbank facility, though cognizant of the mounting complaints, found themselves in a quandary. The Lightning had successfully navigated and passed all its rigorous acceptance trials, its fundamental design appearing robust, and its superchargers functioning precisely as intended. Implementing significant modifications through official bureaucratic channels, however, would inevitably consume several arduous months, a luxury that the ongoing conflict tragically could not afford. In the interim, valuable pilots continued to perish in the skies. What remained universally unrecognized at this critical juncture was that the ultimate solution would not emanate from the sophisticated drafting tables of Lockheed's engineering department, nor would it be discovered within the meticulously controlled environments of Wright Field's testing facilities. The answer was not destined to emerge from intricate wind tunnel data or exhaustive computational analysis. Instead, the pivotal breakthrough would originate from an unassuming individual, a man with the tangible evidence of his craft, grease beneath his fingernails, who possessed the profound intuition to disregard the dictates of the official manual and, instead, place his trust in the subtle messages the engine itself was attempting to convey. In the desperate throes of wartime, extreme necessity often possesses a peculiar way of transforming ordinary wrenches into instruments of tactical advantage, and it is frequently in these dire circumstances that the most profound innovations spring forth from individuals who are blissfully unaware that they are, by conventional wisdom, expected to fail. The P-38's crippling altitude deficiency was on the precipice of encountering a mechanic whose unwavering spirit simply refused to acknowledge the concept of the impossible. His name, regrettably, has been consigned to the comfortable anonymity that invariably envelopes the vast majority of enlisted personnel, their invaluable contributions often fading into the annals of history. However, his squadron mates in the North African theater knew him intimately as the singular individual capable of coaxing a harmonious purr from even the most ailing engine. He held the rank of staff sergeant, an individual perhaps around 30 years of age, and was assigned to a P-38 squadron that had endured severe attrition over the skies of Tunisia in the early months of 1943. Prior to the outbreak of the global conflict, he had honed his skills in various automotive repair shops, establishments where one learned the invaluable art of improvisation, making do with existing resources because customers frequently lacked the financial means for new components. This ingrained, "make it work" ethos, a direct legacy of the Great Depression era, was now poised to fundamentally revolutionize the very nature of aerial warfare. The dedicated mechanic spent his arduous days immersed, often elbow-deep, within the intricate mechanisms of the Allison B-1710 engines, and through this tireless engagement, he began to discern a recurring pattern. Pilots, upon returning from grueling high-altitude missions, consistently voiced grievances regarding a noticeable diminution of engine power when operating above 22,000 feet. In response, he would meticulously operate the engines on the ground, carefully verifying the supercharger boost pressures and scrupulously examining the intercoolers. In every instance, all parameters consistently registered within the prescribed specifications. Yet, a profound realization dawned upon him. These specifications, he understood, were meticulously formulated for sea-level conditions in Burbank, California, a stark contrast to the unforgiving exigencies of combat operations in the scorching North African climate, where ambient temperatures on the tarmac could frequently soar to an astonishing 110 degrees Fahrenheit. With the intense focus of a man whose comrades' lives were at stake, he embarked upon an exhaustive study of the P-38's intricate induction system. The Lightning employed a turbo-supercharger system that was, in its fundamental design, genuinely ingenious. Exhaust gases were expertly channeled to spin a turbine, which in turn compressed the incoming atmospheric air, thereby forcing a greater volume of oxygen into the engine cylinders at elevated altitudes. However, this process of compression inherently generated significant heat, necessitating that the compressed air first pass through a series of intercoolers before entering the engine. These intercoolers were theoretically designed to substantially reduce the temperature of the superheated compressed air by routing it through specialized chambers where cooler ambient air flowed around the pipes. In a theoretical context, this design was elegantly conceived. Yet, in the brutally scorching environment of the North African theater, these intercoolers were attempting the arduous task of cooling compressed air, which frequently registered at 300 degrees Fahrenheit, using ambient air that was itself often hovering around a sweltering 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The critical temperature differential was simply insufficient. Consequently, the air entering the cylinders remained excessively hot, leading to a detrimental reduction in its density and, inevitably, a severe throttling of the engine's power output. However, it was precisely at this juncture that the astute mechanic observed a critical detail that had eluded the scrutiny of all others. The intercooler ducting was equipped with adjustable exit doors, ingeniously controlled by a thermostatic valve. The entire system had been meticulously engineered to maintain a specific temperature range, but this range had been calibrated for moderate environmental conditions. In the demanding crucible of combat, however, pilots required the absolute maximum cooling capacity, not merely a thermostatic equilibrium. A compelling question began to form in his mind. What if one were to completely bypass the thermostatic control and manually force those intercooler exit doors to remain wide open? What if one simply flooded the intercooler chambers with the absolute maximum volume of cooling air that the laws of physics would permit, unburdened by the constraints of careful calibration? The engineering manual, an official and authoritative document, unequivocally stated, "Do not touch it." The technical orders were explicitly clear about the imperative of maintaining factory settings without alteration. However, this particular mechanic possessed a different kind of manual, one implicitly written by the harrowing experiences of pilots who consistently returned from missions with bullet-riddled aircraft and chilling narratives of German adversaries who could effortlessly outline them. Sometimes, the most groundbreaking engineering solutions emerge precisely when one ceases to seek official permission. The thermostatic valve represented a bottleneck, an impediment that no one was willing to officially acknowledge. Lockheed's engineers had incorporated it into the design with the specific intention of safeguarding the engines from the perils of thermal shock. The underlying rationale was that abrupt and significant temperature fluctuations could potentially induce cracking in cylinder heads or cause warping of vital components. Therefore, the valve meticulously modulated the intercooler airflow to maintain temperatures within a safe, predictable, and conservative range, a paradigm of cautious engineering designed to appease legal concerns and minimize warranty claims. The discerning mechanic, however, viewed the situation through an entirely different lens. These engines, he reasoned, were not failing due to thermal shock. Rather, they were failing to generate the requisite power precisely when pilots most desperately needed it, and precious lives were being tragically forfeited as a direct consequence of this overly cautious engineering. He selected a P-38 that was undergoing routine maintenance and immediately set to work. The intercooler exit doors, initially spring-loaded, were controlled by that thermostatic valve, which sensed temperature fluctuations and adjusted accordingly. He completely bypassed the entire system, ingeniously locking the exit doors in the fully open position, thereby ensuring that the maximum possible volume of air would continuously flow through the intercooler cores at all times. He then proceeded to execute another modification, one that would undoubtedly cause experienced engineers to wince in apprehension. The intercooler ducts contained internal restrictive baffles, carefully designed to guarantee an even distribution of air across the cooling surfaces. He systematically removed some of these baffles, effectively widening the airflow path. The principle was elegantly simple: more air, less restriction, culminating in maximum cooling efficiency. It was the mechanical equivalent of disengaging the governor from an engine, a crude, potentially perilous, yet precisely what the exigencies of the combat situation demanded. The eagerly anticipated test flight unfolded on a crisp February morning in 1943. The pilot entrusted with this critical mission was a lieutenant who had already survived 2 harrowing shootdowns and, consequently, felt he had little left to lose. He skillfully guided the modified Lightning skyward, and at an initial altitude of 5,000 feet, the engine temperatures registered as perfectly normal. Ascending to 10,000 feet, conditions remained favorable. At 15,000 feet, the altitude where operational problems typically began to manifest, the cylinder head temperatures were remarkably running 20 degrees cooler than those of standard P-38s. At 20,000 feet, an altitude where most Lightnings conventionally started to labor and wheeze, this particular aircraft was still demonstrating robust manifold pressure. The pilot pushed the aircraft further, to 25,000, then to an impressive 28,000 feet. The engines responded with a harmonious, powerful hum. He radioed down to the ground crew, exclaiming that the climb rate felt as if he had somehow bolted on additional horses. The aircraft was achieving altitude with unprecedented swiftness, surpassing anything he had ever flown before. Upon his triumphant landing, a considerable crowd had gathered, awaiting his report. Word had rapidly disseminated through the maintenance crews that something extraordinary had transpired. The pilot emerged from the cockpit, a wide grin spreading across his face, and uttered 6 words that would irrevocably alter the course of events. "She climbs like a homesick angel." The mechanic, with meticulous care, inspected the spark plugs, examined the cylinder compressions, and scrupulously searched for any indications of thermal damage. There was absolutely none. The engines were operating with optimal efficiency. Cooler intake temperatures intrinsically translated to denser air. Denser air, in turn, meant a greater concentration of oxygen delivered with each cylinder firing. And more oxygen, fundamentally, equated to a substantial increase in power. It was an elementary principle of thermodynamics, the kind of concept readily explainable in a high school physics class. Yet, it had necessitated a mechanic, endowed with the courage to disregard the official manual, to practically implement this fundamental principle in the rigorous environment of the battlefield. Within an astonishing span of just 1 week, every P-38 within that squadron underwent the crucial modification during its routine maintenance schedule. Pilots soon began specifically requesting aircraft by their tail numbers, explicitly asking for the hot rods, equipped with the newly modified intercoolers. The squadron commander found himself confronted with a weighty decision, one that was far from straightforward. On one hand, he was overseeing field modifications being implemented entirely outside of official channels, a type of action that carried the potential to prematurely end careers if any catastrophic failures were to occur. On the other hand, he possessed compelling combat reports unequivocally demonstrating that his modified P-38s were suddenly exhibiting a newfound competitiveness at altitudes where they had been vulnerable sitting ducks just 2 weeks prior. He was a lieutenant colonel, a seasoned veteran, who had personally experienced combat in the tumultuous First World War, and he possessed an invaluable understanding that peacetime bureaucrats frequently overlooked. In the brutal realities of warfare, the most effective solution is invariably the one that delivers immediate results, not the theoretically perfect one that arrives a critical 6 months too late. He dispatched a comprehensive report up the chain of command to 5th Air Force Headquarters, meticulously detailing the modification and its profound operational results. The response that returned was cautiously optimistic but, predictably, constrained by bureaucratic protocol. Continue testing, document everything thoroughly, but do not implement fleet-wide without proper engineering review. In essence, the official directive was, perhaps later. However, the unofficial answer, the one that truly held sway, was that commanders in the field began quietly authorizing the modification for their own respective squadrons. A captain commanding another P-38 unit, having learned of this breakthrough, promptly dispatched his maintenance chief to observe the procedure, and subsequently returned to modify his own aircraft. By March 1943, modified Lightnings were increasingly appearing across the North African theater, and the Luftwaffe, in their aerial encounters, was beginning to discern that something fundamental had unequivocally changed. Meanwhile, in the controlled environment of Wright Field in Ohio, engineers from the Army Air Force were diligently pursuing an official solution to the identical problem. They had acknowledged numerous complaints regarding the aircraft's high-altitude performance and had initiated a methodical testing regimen. This comprehensive program encompassed meticulous wind tunnel evaluations, detailed temperature mapping analysis, and sophisticated computational assessments of airflow dynamics within the intercooler ducts. Such endeavors represented sound scientific practice and adhered to rigorous methodological principles, yet their progress was inherently governed by the deliberate pace characteristic of peacetime engineering review processes. Their preliminary findings, formally released in April 1943, indicated that the efficiency of the intercooler system could be substantially enhanced through a redesign of the existing ducting and a recalibration of the thermostatic valves. The estimated timeline for the full implementation of these proposed improvements spanned between 8 and 12 months, necessitating the manufacture of specialized modification kits by Lockheed and their subsequent distribution through established depot-level maintenance facilities. In stark contrast, the pragmatic solution devised by the field mechanic was already actively deployed on dozens of aircraft, having required approximately 4 hours per plane to implement using only standard tools. This innovative fix demanded no specialized components, no factory support, and no intricate engineering schematics, relying instead on an intuitive, hands-on understanding of the engine's operational requirements. This disparity inevitably engendered an uncomfortable predicament, one that military bureaucracies typically abhor: undeniable evidence that established official procedures were being significantly outpaced by the ingenuity of individuals wielding mere wrenches. Consequently, a contingent of engineering officers voiced their strong objections, citing legitimate concerns that unauthorized modifications could potentially invalidate technical compliance certifications and thereby create formidable maintenance complexities. Their reservations were not entirely unfounded. The principle of standardization exists for valid operational reasons, and ad hoc field modifications can indeed precipitate logistical nightmares, particularly when attempting to provide support for hundreds of aircraft deployed across multiple combat theaters. However, the exigencies of combat often possess a unique capacity to definitively resolve arguments that prolonged peacetime debates never manage to settle. We invite you to stay with us and watch the end of this video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. By the late spring of 1943, a sufficient number of modified P-38s had successfully completed numerous missions, consistently demonstrating measurably superior results, leading to a gradual erosion of initial resistance. The accumulated performance data proved irrefutable. Climb rates experienced an impressive improvement, ranging from 12 to 15% at critical altitudes. Crucially, engine temperatures consistently remained within safe operational limits, and no catastrophic failures attributable to the modifications had been reported. This compelling evidence prompted the 8th Air Force in England to begin actively requesting detailed information regarding the successful field modification. The ultimate validation arrived in the form of mission reports that, to many, read like fantastical accounts. On April 18, 1943, a formation of specially modified P-38s belonging to the 1st Fighter Group successfully intercepted a flight of German Ju-88 bombers high over the Mediterranean Sea at an altitude of 26,000 feet. The leader of the Lightning flight quickly identified the enemy formation, issued the command to attack, and his pilots, with their enhanced aircraft, ascended an additional 3,000 feet in less than 2 minutes to establish an advantageous position for a diving pass. The German aircrews, accustomed to the P-38's historical struggles at such altitudes, were utterly unprepared for the Americans' ability to achieve an attack posture with such astonishing rapidity. 3 Ju-88s were swiftly engulfed in flames before their escorting fighters could mount any effective reaction. The subsequent after-action report specifically highlighted this exceptional performance, noting, "Aircraft exhibited superior climb performance. Modification appears effective in combat conditions." Later, during May 1943, over the rugged terrain of Tunisia, modified P-38s from the 82nd Fighter Group engaged in fierce aerial combat with formidable Bf-109gs at a dizzying altitude of 28,000 feet. In one particularly intense encounter, an American pilot, a first lieutenant hailing from Michigan, found himself locked in a climbing scissors maneuver with a seasoned German ace. In the days of the unmodified P-38s, such a maneuver would have almost certainly been tantamount to suicide, as the Bf-109 would have effortlessly dominated the vertical fight. However, the enhanced Lightning remarkably kept pace with the Messerschmitt, matching its every turn during the challenging climb. The German pilot, likely disoriented and confused by the unexpected capabilities of his adversary, committed a critical tactical error, attempting to extend vertically. The P-38, demonstrating its newfound prowess, remained directly on his tail, allowing the lieutenant to unleash a decisive 3-second burst into the 109's engine. The Messerschmitt disintegrated spectacularly at 31,000 feet. The dramatic gun camera footage of this engagement rapidly circulated through every fighter squadron operating in the theater, serving as undeniable proof of the modification's effectiveness. The accumulating operational data began to make the initial skeptics profoundly uncomfortable. Between March and June 1943, squadrons equipped with the modified P-38s reported a remarkable 42% reduction in losses sustained during high-altitude bomber escort missions, a significant improvement when compared to the preceding 3-month period. Pilots were now able to initiate engagements and disengage on their own terms, rather than being compelled into defensive struggles they were previously unable to win. These upgraded Lightnings were consistently reaching their optimal operational altitude of 30,000 feet 4 to 6 minutes faster than their stock counterparts. In the frantic context of a dogfight, a 4-minute advantage is equivalent to several hours, fundamentally altering the dynamic from being the hunted to becoming the hunter. The Luftwaffe, Germany's air force, also took notice of these startling developments. German intelligence reports from mid-1943, which were subsequently captured after the war's conclusion, specifically mentioned that American P-38s were exhibiting markedly superior performance at altitude compared to previous encounters. One Luftwaffe pilot, interrogated after being shot down in June, informed his captors that he had initially believed he was combating P-47 Thunderbolts, given the impressive climb rate, and expressed profound shock upon learning they were, in fact, Lightnings. This psychological impact held almost as much strategic significance as the tangible tactical advantage. German pilots, who had grown accustomed to and comfortable with the P-38's known limitations, were suddenly forced to acknowledge and respect it as a legitimate and formidable high-altitude threat. By the summer of 1943, this crucial modification had acquired an unofficial moniker among the flight crews, the White Lightning upgrade. This evocative name referenced both the P-38's distinctive natural metal finish and the potent, moonshine-like surge of power it imparted to the aircraft's engines. Pilots who had experienced both configurations consistently described the difference as night and day. One particularly enthusiastic captain from the 14th Fighter Group conveyed to a reporter that flying a standard P-38, after having experienced the modification, was akin to reverting to driving a cumbersome truck after having become accustomed to the exhilarating performance of a high-end sports car. Lockheed's own engineers at their Burbank facility finally had the opportunity to meticulously examine a field-modified P-38 in June 1943. This examination elicited a complex mixture of professional admiration and profound consternation. Admiration stemmed from the undeniable fact that the modification functioned precisely as its proponents had claimed. Horror, however, arose from the realization that it flagrantly violated approximately 15 distinct design protocols and had been implemented with what one engineer rightly termed aggressive simplification. The bypassed thermostatic valve, the deliberately removed baffles, and the intercooler doors locked in an open position, all of these improvisations made theoretically minded engineers deeply uneasy. Yet, the empirical test data unequivocally supported the modification's efficacy. Dynamometer runs demonstrated a significant 12% increase in power output at 25,000 feet when compared to the standard configuration. Crucially, temperature margins remained well within acceptable limits, even under conditions of sustained high power settings. The company was thus confronted with an uncomfortable truth. Their meticulously engineered product was being effectively improved in the field by resourceful mechanics who had never once consulted an engineering blueprint. While professional pride undoubtedly suffered a blow, Lockheed's leadership deserves considerable credit for their subsequent actions. They commendably set aside their pride and immediately set to work. By July 1943, dedicated engineering teams were rigorously analyzing the precise mechanisms by which the field modification achieved its success and, critically, how to properly integrate it across the entire production line. Their investigations ultimately confirmed what the field mechanic had intuitively grasped. The original intercooler system had been over-engineered, incorporating excessive safety margins that the realities of combat operations simply did not require. The thermostatic valve, designed to guard against theoretical problems, was inadvertently creating very real operational limitations. The P-38J model, which commenced production in August 1943, consequently incorporated revised intercooler ducting design to facilitate improved airflow, along with modified thermostatic controls that remained open for longer durations under high power settings. While not an exact replication of the field modification, Lockheed's engineers introduced further refinements and maintained superior quality control. Nevertheless, the fundamental principle remained identical: to channel a greater volume of cooling air through the intercoolers, particularly at high altitudes. The J model also featured significantly enlarged intercooler cores, boasting 25% more surface area, which further enhanced heat rejection capabilities. As a direct result, engine output at 25,000 feet experienced a substantial jump of nearly 200 horsepower compared to earlier models. The P-38L, which began rolling off the assembly lines in June 1944, represented an even more advanced iteration. Lockheed's design teams developed new intercooler housings featuring highly streamlined internal ducting, which effectively minimized restriction while simultaneously maximizing airflow. The exit doors were made larger, and the entire control system was comprehensively redesigned to prioritize optimal cooling over mere temperature stability. Combat pilots transitioning from earlier model Lightnings to the L variant consistently reported that it felt like an entirely different aircraft when operating at altitude. The rate of climb to 30,000 feet improved by an impressive nearly 30% compared to the original P-38F and G models, which had struggled so conspicuously in 1942. Herein lies the truly compelling aspect of this narrative. When Lockheed engineers formally presented their significantly improved intercooler system to the Army Air Force technical reviewers in late 1943, they openly credited the field modifications for having illuminated the path forward. The official engineering reports explicitly acknowledged that direct combat experience had unequivocally revealed critical limitations in the original design that had unfortunately eluded detection during conventional testing procedures. This represented a rare moment of institutional humility, a candid admission that the ingenuity of mechanics in North Africa had successfully resolved a problem that the most skilled engineers in Burbank had inadvertently overlooked. By the close of 1944, more than 4,000 P-38s had been manufactured incorporating these enhanced intercooler systems, whose lineage could be traced directly back to one mechanic's steadfast refusal to accept the official manual as immutable gospel. The tactical implications of this transformation rippled across every theater of operations where P-38s were deployed, fundamentally reshaping how commanders strategically employed the Lightning in combat. Prior to the widespread adoption of the modification, military doctrine generally classified P-38s as medium-altitude fighters, deeming them most effective when utilized below 20,000 feet, where their performance remained competitive. However, following the profound upgrade, squadron leaders began confidently assigning Lightnings to high-altitude escort duties that had previously been the exclusive domain of P-47 Thunderbolts. In August 1943, notably, modified P-38s from the 55th Fighter Group successfully escorted B-17 bombers on a critical mission targeting Regensburg at a daunting altitude of 30,000 feet, a mission profile that would have been considered utterly suicidal just 6 months earlier. The frustration that had plagued pilots, leading to sentiments bordering on despair 6 months prior, found its most compelling validation during the critical follow-up operations of Operation Torch across North Africa throughout the spring and summer of 1943. A vivid instance occurred on May 7th, when Captain John Weltman, a distinguished pilot with the 27th Fighter Squadron, skillfully navigated a specially adapted P-38 Lightning while providing essential bomber escort to Tunis. His formation suddenly confronted a formidable group of a dozen Bf-109gs at an altitude of 27,000 feet, their menacing intent clearly to breach the escort and attack the vulnerable bomber formation. Captain Weltman's element responded with an aggressive ascent, rapidly climbing to a commanding 32,000 feet. This decisive maneuver compelled the German adversaries to engage at an elevation where the modified Lightnings now possessed a definitive tactical superiority. The engagement concluded with his flight successfully claiming 3 confirmed enemy aircraft destroyed, a remarkable achievement accomplished without the loss of a single bomber under their protection. His subsequent after-action report contained a succinct yet profoundly impactful observation that quickly permeated every fighter group in the theater. Aircraft performed beyond expectations at altitude. Modification is combat critical. This statement served as irrefutable proof of the transformation in the P-38's capabilities. Across the vast expanse of the European theater, and indeed elsewhere, similar narratives unfolded with minor variations in detail, but always converging on the same triumphant conclusion. Major Thomas Lynch, a revered ace pilot attached to the 39th Fighter Squadron operating in the Pacific, recounted a particularly intense engagement with Japanese Ki-43 Oscars at 28,000 feet over the rugged terrain of New Guinea in July 1943. While the Oscar was renowned for its impressive agility and maneuverability, its tactical effectiveness heavily relied on its superior climb rate to dictate the terms of aerial combat. We invite you to stay with us and watch the conclusion of this compelling narrative. Your support, including a like and a subscription, would be greatly appreciated. Yet, Lynch's enhanced P-38, demonstrating its newfound prowess, ascended directly through the heart of the Japanese formation, effectively scattering their cohesive unit and creating crucial openings for his wingmen to systematically pick off the now isolated enemy aircraft. That very evening, he penned a reflective entry in his diary, capturing the profound shift in aerial dominance. The Lightning finally does what it was always supposed to do. We own the sky up here now. The quantitative evidence from the latter half of 1943 unequivocally underscored this dramatic transformation. Fighter groups equipped with the modified P-38s reported an astonishing 57% increase in the destruction of enemy aircraft during high-altitude engagements, a stark contrast to the same unit's performance in the challenging periods of late 1942 and early 1943. More critically, the rates of bomber losses on missions escorted by these improved P-38s plummeted by a significant 31%. This reduction translated directly into the preservation of hundreds of invaluable aircrew lives and the safeguarding of billions of dollars worth of aircraft and munitions, ensuring they reached their strategic targets rather than tragically plummeting from the sky over occupied Europe. Beyond the memorable statistics and combat victories, the transformative modification profoundly reshaped the psychological landscape for the pilots themselves. Interviews conducted with P-38 pilots in 1942 frequently conveyed deep-seated frustration and a sense of fighting at an inherent disadvantage. In stark contrast, interviews conducted from late 1943 onward radiated an almost palpable air of confidence and assertiveness. Lieutenant William McGuire, a pilot serving with the 71st Fighter Squadron, articulated this shift to a reporter in October 1943 with striking clarity. 6 months ago, I'd see Germans above me and think, here we go again. Now I see them and think, you're already dead. You just don't know it yet. This dramatic change in perspective perfectly encapsulated the strategic advantage that an additional 3,000 feet of climb rate afforded, the invaluable luxury of choosing when and how to engage in combat, effectively dictating the terms of engagement rather than merely reacting to them. The Chronicle of the Mechanic, whose ingenuity sparked this revolution, ultimately concludes in a manner typical for countless enlisted personnel, shrouded in obscurity, devoid of military honors or official commendation. His tour of duty likely ended with a rotation back to the continental United States sometime in late 1943, where he presumably resumed a civilian life, perhaps returning to the familiar trade of automobile repair in his hometown, never to be formally recognized in the annals of aviation history. The rigid protocols of the Army Air Forces did not permit the bestowal of Distinguished Service Medals for unauthorized field modifications, irrespective of the countless lives such innovations demonstrably saved. His profound contribution endures not in official records bearing his name, but in scattered and often overlooked maintenance logs and after-action reports that obliquely reference improved performance without detailing its genesis, and most significantly, in the continued survival of pilots who returned home safely because their engines reliably performed at a critical 28,000 feet. Nevertheless, his indelible influence is discernibly woven throughout the fabric of aviation history, for those discerning enough to perceive it. The P-38's dramatic metamorphosis from an aircraft plagued by altitude limitations into a formidable high-altitude predator fundamentally reshaped American fighter tactics for the remainder of the conflict. More broadly, it served as a powerful validation of the principle that practical field experience and grassroots innovation could, at times, transcend and even outpace conventional engineering orthodoxy. This vital lesson, unfortunately, would be learned, forgotten, and then relearned by military services through subsequent conflicts, from Korea to Vietnam and beyond. A tangible testament to his impact can be found in the design of the Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star, America's pioneering operational jet fighter. Its intercooler specifications notably incorporated provisions for maximizing airflow under actual combat conditions, a direct application of the hard-won lessons derived from a mechanic who had never once set foot inside the sophisticated confines of the Burbank Wind Tunnel. The overarching lesson emanating from this episode extended far beyond the confines of a single aircraft or a specific modification. While engineers, meticulously working from intricate test data and theoretical models, are undeniably capable of creating magnificent and complex machines, these marvels of engineering must ultimately operate within the unpredictable crucible of real-world conditions. These operational realities often remain uncaptured by even the most exhaustive testing regimes, encompassing factors such as the intense heat of the North African desert, the immense psychological and physical stresses of combat, and the demands of sustained high-power operations at extreme altitudes. The original design of the P-38 simply could not have accounted for every conceivable variable because it was inherently impossible. No peacetime test program, however comprehensive, can ever fully replicate the sheer chaos, exigencies, and unforeseen challenges inherent in a full-scale war. It is precisely in this critical juncture that the invaluable contributions of mechanics, pilots, and line crew chiefs become indispensable. They are the unsung heroes who bridge the crucial gap between what the technical manual prescribes and what truly functions effectively when lives are on the line and bullets are flying. Modern aviation engineering, recognizing the profound significance of such ingenuity, has since institutionalized many of the principles championed by that nameless mechanic. Official field modification programs now exist within established channels, enabling the rapid implementation of combat-proven improvements. The Air Force, for instance, maintains entire organizations specifically dedicated to systematically harvesting innovative solutions from operational units, and then fast-tracking them through accelerated development and deployment cycles. Yet, even in today's advanced technological landscape, the most groundbreaking innovations frequently originate in the same organic fashion, with an individual intimately acquainted with the hardware, possessing the acute observational skills to perceive something others have overlooked, and crucially, harboring the courage to attempt a solution that deviates from the prescribed manual. The P-38 Lightning ultimately concluded its wartime service with an exceptionally distinguished combat record. With over 10,000 units manufactured, flown by America's two most successful aces, instrumental in the pivotal operation to shoot down Admiral Yamamoto, and eventually earning the grudging respect of enemies who had initially dismissed its capabilities, its legacy is undeniable. This remarkable heritage owes a significant debt to Kelly Johnson's brilliant original design, to the dedicated Allison engineers who crafted its robust power plants, and to the thousands of courageous pilots who valiantly fought within its cockpit. However, it also owes an equally profound, albeit often unacknowledged, debt to a nameless staff sergeant. This individual, observing an engine that was not performing to its fullest potential, possessed the foresight and conviction to decide that the official manual was not, in fact, the final arbiter of truth. This narrative powerfully illustrates that sometimes the most pivotal innovations do not cascade from the top down. Rather, they ascend from the bottom up, initially sketched in greased pencil and ultimately validated in the crucible of combat. That mechanic, in all likelihood, never fully grasped the sheer number of lives his work saved or the far-reaching ripple effect his audacious idea would have throughout the annals of aviation history. But every P-38 pilot who successfully returned home from a harrowing mission at 30,000 feet understood implicitly, and in the silent gratitude of those saved lies the only recognition that truly matters.